The easiest thing in the world is to change a grade. The hardest thing is to keep your integrity when everyone expects you to sell it. I never imagined that one unfinished exam paper would become the reason an entire city learned my name. At 29 years old, I had been teaching history at Brookhaven Academy for almost 6 years. The paycheck was modest. The classrooms were always too warm in September and too cold in January, and every semester brought another stack of essays taller than my coffee mug. I loved every exhausting minute of it. Teaching was never about perfect grades. It was about helping young people become the kind of adults who would still make the right choice when nobody was watching. That Monday morning smelled like fresh coffee, dry erase markers, and newly polished hallways. Sunlight spilled through the classroom windows while students settled into their seats, laughing about football games, weekend jobs, and college applications. Final examinations had ended 2 days earlier, and I was finishing the last round of grading before report cards were submitted. My desk disappeared beneath piles of blue exam booklets. Some students had surprised me. Others had disappointed themselves more than they had disappointed me. Every paper represented effort, mistakes, and possibilities. I believed each deserved the same amount of attention. Near the bottom of the stack rested one paper that everyone else in the school would probably have graded in less than 2 minutes. Noah Moretti, 16 years old. Brilliant when he wanted to be. Charming when it benefited him. Arrogant almost all the time. His teachers often described him the same way. Unlimited potential trapped inside unlimited confidence. I opened his exam booklet again, hoping I had overlooked something during the first review. I had not. The first half of the exam demonstrated remarkable understanding. Dates, historical analysis, source evaluation, all nearly flawless. Then everything changed. The final essay, worth almost 30% of the grade, contained only 3 careless sentences before stopping completely. The remaining pages were blank. Not crossed out. Not revised. Simply empty. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the unfinished pages. No one knew the material. I had watched him debate complex historical events with classmates only a week earlier. He could have written one of the strongest essays in the class. Instead, he had turned in silence. My classroom door opened softly. Melissa, the English teacher from across the hall, stepped inside carrying a folder against her chest. "Still grading?" she asked. "Almost finished." She noticed the paper in front of me. "Noah Moretti?" I nodded. She sighed knowingly. "Good luck with that." "Why?" Melissa hesitated before answering. "Because every year someone decides that normal rules somehow become flexible around him." I looked back at the blank pages. Rules are only meaningful when they apply equally. She offered me a sympathetic smile before leaving the room. Her footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. I calculated the score one final time. The unfinished essay lowered his average below the passing requirement. The number remained the same no matter how many times I checked it. My red pen hovered above the grading sheet. For a brief second, I imagined adding just enough points to push him across the line. Nobody would question it. Nobody would ever know. Except me. I wrote the final grade exactly as he had earned it. My signature looked unusually small beneath the number. I closed the booklet, stacked it neatly with the others, and carried the completed grades to the administration office before I could second-guess myself. The secretary accepted the folder with her usual cheerful smile. "Another semester finished." "Almost," I answered. Walking back toward my classroom, I noticed several students gathered around the hallway bulletin board discussing report cards that would be released the following afternoon. Their excitement reminded me why honesty mattered. Grades were not rewards. They were reflections. As I unlocked my classroom door, my email notification chimed. A new message had arrived from the principal. Subject: Parent Conference Request. Student: Noah Moretti. Requested for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. I read the message twice. No explanation. No additional details. Just a confirmation that a parent wished to review the final examination in person. I quietly closed my laptop and looked once more at the empty pages inside Noah's exam booklet. Somehow those blank pages no longer felt empty. They felt like the beginning of a story that neither of us had chosen. The next morning arrived with the kind of calm that usually settles over a school before the first bell. Students hurried through the front entrance carrying backpacks, coffee cups, and unfinished conversations about summer plans. Teachers exchanged quick greetings while balancing lesson plans they probably would not need again until fall. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary, except for the quiet reminder sitting in the corner of my mind. 9 o'clock. Parent conference. I unlocked my classroom, arranged the desks one final time, and placed Noah Moretti's examination booklet neatly on the center of my desk. I had already reread every answer 3 times. Every calculation was correct. Every comment reflected exactly what I believed he needed to hear. I refused to walk into that meeting uncertain. At 8:55, the principal appeared in my doorway. Principal Harris was a kind woman who had spent 30 years protecting teachers from unnecessary storms. This morning, however, even she looked unusually thoughtful. "Emily," she said softly, "the parent has arrived." I smiled politely. "Thank you. I am ready." She hesitated. "If you would like me to stay during the meeting, I can." "I appreciate that." I looked toward the exam booklet resting on my desk. "But I think this conversation should begin with honesty, not witnesses." She studied my expression for a long moment before nodding. "You have always been brave." "No," I answered gently. "Just consistent." She left, quietly closing the classroom door behind her. The hallway outside seemed unusually quiet. A few seconds later, I heard measured footsteps approaching. They were slow, confident, never hurried. Whoever this man was, he moved through the building as though he had spent his life entering rooms where everyone else waited for him to speak first. The door opened softly. "Good morning," I said, standing beside my desk. "Please come in." The man stepped inside without unnecessary ceremony. He looked to be in his mid-30s, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit beneath a long black overcoat. His appearance was elegant rather than flashy. Dark hair was neatly combed back. His posture remained relaxed, but there was something unmistakably disciplined about the way he carried himself. The open collar of his shirt revealed the edge of intricate black tattoos climbing from his neck beneath the fabric, continuing onto his hands where the cuffs ended. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable. He glanced briefly around the classroom before looking toward me. Sharp gray eyes met mine, without hostility or warmth. Simply attention. "Miss Brooks?" he asked. "Yes." I offered my hand. "Thank you for coming." He accepted the handshake with surprising gentleness. His grip was firm without trying to prove anything. "Vincent Moretti," he said. "Noah's father." There was no dramatic introduction. No expectation that I should recognize his name. If he noticed the brief flicker of surprise in my expression, he chose not to acknowledge it. "Please," I said, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. "Have a seat." He sat comfortably, resting both hands together while waiting for me to begin. The silence between us felt unusual. Most parents entered these meetings already prepared to defend their children or question every grading decision. Vincent simply waited. "I understand you wanted to review Noah's final examination," I began. "Yes." His voice remained calm. "I would like to understand how you reached your decision. Not challenge. Not argue. Understand." The choice of words immediately caught my attention. I opened the examination booklet and turned it toward him. The first sections demonstrate excellent preparation. Noah clearly understands the material. Vincent lowered his eyes to the pages, reading every handwritten comment without interrupting. I continued. "The difficulty begins here." I gently turned to the unfinished essay. This assignment represented 30% of the final examination. He wrote only 3 sentences before stopping. Vincent remained silent. He read the blank pages carefully, almost longer than he had read the completed ones. Finally, he asked a single question. "Do you believe my son was capable of finishing this essay?" I answered without hesitation. "Absolutely." He nodded once. "Then why did he not?" Only Noah can answer that. Another quiet pause settled across the classroom. Outside, students laughed somewhere down the hallway as lockers opened and closed. Inside my room, nothing moved except the sunlight slowly crossing the wooden floor. Vincent closed the examination booklet with deliberate care and looked directly at me. "Would you mind if I borrowed this for one evening?" he asked quietly. "I would like my son to explain every empty page himself." Vincent left my classroom carrying the examination booklet beneath one arm, as though it weighed far more than a few sheets of paper. He never asked me to reconsider the grade. He never hinted that influence could solve the problem. He simply thanked me for my time and walked out with the same calm confidence he had carried into the room. I stood beside my desk for several minutes after the door closed, replaying every word of our conversation. Something about him refused to fit the picture I had unconsciously created in my mind. I had expected frustration, perhaps even disappointment. Instead, I had met a father who seemed far more interested in understanding his son than protecting his pride. The rest of the school day passed quietly. Students cleaned out lockers, signed yearbooks, and promised to stay in touch over the summer. Noah never appeared in my classroom. I wondered if he already knew his father had requested the examination booklet. I wondered if he cared. Late that afternoon, after grading the final makeup assignment and organizing my classroom for the summer break, I switched off the lights and drove home. My apartment was small but comfortable, tucked above a neighborhood bookstore that always smelled faintly of paper and fresh coffee. I changed into a soft sweater, made a cup of chamomile tea, and tried to lose myself inside a novel. It did not work. Every few pages my thoughts drifted back to those unfinished exam pages. Blank paper had a strange way of speaking louder than written words. Across the city, in a house I had never seen, another conversation was unfolding without me. Vincent placed the examination booklet on a long oak dining table where the evening sunlight stretched across polished wood. Noah arrived several minutes later, dropping his backpack beside the chair with the casual confidence of someone expecting another ordinary dinner. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. Vincent nodded toward the examination booklet. "Sit down." Noah glanced at the familiar cover and shrugged. "It is just a history test." "I know." Vincent opened the booklet to the final pages and slowly turned it toward his son. "Explain this." Noah barely looked at the blank sheets before leaning back in his chair. "I did not feel like writing the essay." Vincent remained silent. Noah continued speaking as though the answer required no further explanation. "My average was already high enough. One assignment was not going to matter." Vincent rested one hand lightly against the table. Apparently it did. Noah gave a dismissive smile. "Teachers always make things dramatic. Someone will probably adjust the grade anyway." Those words lingered in the room longer than either of them expected. Vincent lowered his eyes to the red ink comments written beneath the unfinished essay. He read them once, then again. Every sentence was precise, respectful, honest. "Your analysis demonstrates strong understanding, but incomplete work cannot receive full credit. Your ideas deserve the effort of being finished. I believe you are capable of much more than you submitted today." Vincent traced the edge of the page with one finger before quietly asking, "Did your teacher embarrass you?" Noah looked confused. "No." "Did she insult you?" "No." "Did she treat you differently from the other students?" Noah hesitated for the first time that evening. "Not really." Vincent closed the booklet gently. "Then tell me why you expected her to ignore unfinished work." Noah looked away toward the windows overlooking the city skyline. "Because people usually do." The answer settled heavily into the silence. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not lecture. He simply stood, picked up the examination booklet, and walked toward the study at the far end of the house. Noah watched him disappear through the doorway without understanding why his father looked more disappointed than angry. Alone inside the quiet room, Vincent placed the booklet on his desk beneath the warm glow of a reading lamp. Around him stood shelves filled with expensive books collected over many years, yet his attention never left the few handwritten comments on those final pages. A teacher he had met only once had refused to lower her standards, not because she disliked his son, but because she believed he deserved better than excuses. For the first time in many years, Vincent found himself wondering whether the most valuable lesson Noah would ever receive had nothing to do with history at all. The following morning began with an unusual sense of peace. Summer break officially started, leaving the school quieter than I had heard it in months. Empty hallways echoed with the distant hum of maintenance crews preparing classrooms for the fall. Bulletin boards slowly lost their colorful displays. Desks stood neatly stacked, and sunlight stretched across polished floors without the constant rhythm of students rushing from one class to another. I arrived early anyway. Teachers never truly stopped working when the semester ended. There were lesson plans to improve, reading lists to update, and a classroom that always seemed to need one more shelf or one less box. I unlocked my door and opened every window, letting fresh June air drift inside. The room smelled of books, dry wood, and blooming flowers from the courtyard below. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe the Noah Moretti situation had reached its natural conclusion. I had done my job honestly. Whatever happened next belonged to his family, not to me. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Miss Brooks?" a calm female voice asked. "Yes. Good morning. This is Angela from the Moretti Family Foundation. Mr. Moretti asked me to contact you." I leaned against my desk, immediately cautious. "How can I help you?" "The foundation would like to make a donation to your classroom and the history department. New technology, student scholarships, updated textbooks, anything the school may need. There would be no publicity attached to the gift." I remained silent for several seconds. Her tone was respectful. There was no pressure in her voice. Yet something inside me felt unsettled. "May I ask why?" "Mr. Moretti was impressed by your dedication to education." I smiled faintly. "That is generous. Would you be willing to accept?" I looked around my classroom. The aging projector occasionally flickered. Several desks had scratches from years of use. My students deserved better resources. Every practical part of my mind told me to say yes. But another thought refused to disappear. "Angela," I said gently, "may I ask one more question?" "Of course." "Would this offer have been made if Noah had passed my class?" Silence answered me before she finally admitted, "I honestly do not know." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. "Then I cannot accept it." She sounded genuinely surprised. "Miss Brooks, the donation has no conditions." "I believe you. Then why refuse?" I walked slowly toward the classroom window overlooking the empty courtyard. "Because my students deserve support that arrives for the right reason. If I accept this immediately after grading Mr. Moretti's exam, people may believe honesty has a price. I cannot teach integrity during the school year and create doubt the moment summer begins." Angela remained quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice carried unmistakable respect. "I will share your message with Mr. Moretti exactly as you said it." "Thank you." The call ended, leaving me alone with the gentle breeze moving through the open windows. I wondered if I had just turned away the largest donation our department would ever receive. The thought stung more than I wanted to admit. That afternoon, across the city, Angela placed her phone on Vincent's desk and repeated every word without changing a single sentence. Vincent listened without interrupting. His fingers rested lightly on Noah's examination booklet, which still remained open beside him. "She refused?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "Did she sound offended?" "No." "Grateful?" Angela smiled softly. "She sounded consistent." Vincent leaned back in his chair, looking toward the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sunlight caught the intricate black tattoos rising from his neck before disappearing beneath the collar of his white shirt. He had spent years meeting people eager to impress him, negotiate with him, or benefit from his influence. Very few had ever declined it without hesitation. He picked up the examination booklet once more and reread the final handwritten sentence beneath Noah's unfinished essay. "I believe you are capable of much more than you submitted today." For the first time, Vincent realized those words no longer belonged only to his son. Somehow, they had begun asking the very same question of him. 3 days passed without another phone call from the Moretti family. Summer settled comfortably over the city, replacing the morning rush of school buses with neighborhood children riding bicycles and sprinklers humming across freshly cut lawns. I spent my mornings reorganizing lesson plans for the fall semester and my afternoons volunteering at the public library's reading program. Life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, and I almost convinced myself that Noah Moretti had become nothing more than another student whose story had ended with a report card. Then, on Thursday afternoon, someone knocked softly on my classroom door. I looked up from a stack of donated history books to find Noah standing alone in the hallway. There were no expensive cars waiting outside. No assistants. No father. Just a 16-year-old boy shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. "May I come in?" he asked. His voice carried far less confidence than I remembered. "Of course," I replied. He stepped inside, looking around the empty classroom as though seeing it for the first time. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the rows of desks that would remain empty until August. For nearly a full minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, Noah reached into his backpack and placed a spiral notebook on my desk. "What is this?" I asked. "My essay." I gently opened the notebook. More than 20 handwritten pages filled it from beginning to end. Careful research, organized arguments, thoughtful analysis. The work reflected exactly the student I had always believed he could become. You wrote all of this? I asked quietly. He nodded. My father made me answer every question I left blank. I looked up at him. Did he help you? No. Noah managed a small, embarrassed smile. He only asked one thing. What was that? Noah lowered his eyes. He asked whether I wanted people to respect my last name or my work. The classroom became wonderfully quiet again. I slowly turned another page, noticing corrections written in different colored ink where Noah had revised entire paragraphs instead of settling for easy answers. This took a long time, I said. Almost 3 days. Why? He shrugged awkwardly. Because I kept realizing my first answers were lazy. I smiled without meaning to. That is called learning. Noah laughed softly, though there was no arrogance left in it. I think that is what my father was hoping you would say. I closed the notebook carefully and slid it back toward him. His smile faded slightly. You are not grading it. No. He looked confused. But I finished the assignment. After the semester ended. I know. Then this essay is no longer about earning points. He stared at the notebook in silence. It is about proving something to yourself, I continued. Grades measure performance on a particular day. Character is built afterward, when nobody is keeping score. Noah slowly nodded. So I still failed. You failed one examination. I met his eyes with complete honesty. Today, I do not think you failed yourself. His shoulders relaxed in a way I had never seen before. He picked up the notebook again, holding it much more carefully than when he had first placed it on my desk. Before leaving, he paused at the doorway. Miss Brooks, yes. My father said you would probably refuse to change the grade. He knows me better than I expected. Noah smiled for the first time without a trace of pride. He also said that if I wanted another chance, I would have to earn it instead of asking for it. After he walked away, I remained standing beside my desk, watching the afternoon sunlight stretch across the empty classroom. Somewhere beyond those quiet hallways, a father had chosen to teach responsibility instead of privilege, and his son had finally discovered that the most valuable lessons were never written at the top of an exam paper. By the middle of July, I had almost forgotten what an ordinary summer felt like. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Noah arrived at the public library exactly 5 minutes before our volunteer reading program began. He was never late. He never expected special treatment. He carried a notebook instead of excuses, and little by little I watched confidence transform into discipline. The first week he spoke only when I asked him a question. The second week, he began helping younger students find history books they actually wanted to read. By the third week, children started looking for him before they looked for me. They trusted him because he never pretended to know everything. Instead, he admitted when he needed to learn. That alone made him different from the boy who had walked into my classroom at the beginning of the semester believing unfinished work deserved finished rewards. One warm afternoon, after the reading program ended, Noah stayed behind stacking chairs while I returned books to the shelves. The library smelled of old paper, polished wood, and fresh coffee drifting in from the cafe across the street. Miss Brooks, he said, breaking the comfortable silence. May I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever think I was a bad person? I paused before answering. No. He looked genuinely surprised. Not even after I failed your class? I smiled gently. You did not fail because you lacked ability. You failed because you believed ability was enough. Noah lowered his eyes to the floor. There is a difference. A very big one. He nodded slowly, absorbing the words instead of arguing with them. My father has changed too, he admitted after another long silence. How so? He asks me about school every evening now. Noah laughed quietly. Not my grades. My effort. I could not hide my smile. And what do you tell him? The truth. He leaned against the back of a chair, looking out the library window where children chased pigeons across the sidewalk. It is strange. What is? For years I thought he wanted me to win. Noah shook his head thoughtfully. Now I think he just wanted me to become someone worth respecting. Those words stayed with me long after he left that afternoon. 2 days later, while organizing donated books in the library office, I heard another familiar knock. This time, the footsteps were slower, calmer, impossible to mistake. Vincent Moretti stood quietly outside the open doorway, wearing a simple navy shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. The intricate black tattoos along his hands and lower arms were clearly visible beneath the afternoon sunlight, yet nothing about his appearance felt intimidating. He carried only a small paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. I hope I am not interrupting, he said. Not at all. He stepped inside and placed the bag gently on the table. Fresh blueberry muffins. The volunteers have been working hard. I laughed softly. You are becoming very good at anonymous generosity. Not anonymous anymore. His expression warmed ever so slightly. I am trying to improve. We stood quietly for a moment while the library settled into its peaceful afternoon rhythm. Finally, Vincent spoke again. Noah has been happier these past few weeks than he has been in years. He earned that happiness. Vincent nodded. So did you. I looked at him with honest curiosity. I only graded an examination. He slowly shook his head. No. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable sincerity. You graded an examination. Then you taught my son that one mistake did not have to become his identity. Those are not the same thing. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Sunlight filtered through the tall library windows, covering the worn wooden floor with golden rectangles that shifted gently as clouds drifted overhead. Vincent looked toward the children's reading corner before quietly adding, I spent years believing influence could solve almost every problem. He looked back at me. You reminded both of us that character solves the ones that matter most. August arrived with the gentle promise of new beginnings. The school parking lot slowly filled again as teachers returned to prepare their classrooms before students came back for another year. Bulletin boards bloomed with fresh colors. New lesson plans rested neatly inside binders, and the familiar scent of sharpened pencils mixed with fresh paint drifting through the hallways. I unlocked room 214 with the same small brass key I had carried for 6 years, smiling as sunlight poured across the polished desks waiting for another generation of curious minds. Everything felt familiar until the principal knocked softly on my open door. Emily, Principal Harris said, holding a sealed envelope. This was delivered by hand this morning. I accepted it with quiet curiosity. There was no return address, only my name written in elegant handwriting across the front. Inside rested a single folded letter and an old black and white photograph. My breath caught the moment I unfolded the picture. It showed a much younger woman standing beside a group of elementary school children outside a small community center. I recognized her immediately. My mother. She had passed away when I was 16, yet I could still remember the way she smiled whenever she volunteered with children after work. Behind her stood another volunteer I had never paid much attention to before. A young woman with bright eyes and kind laughter frozen forever inside the faded photograph. Beneath the picture, someone had written a date from almost 20 years earlier. I unfolded the letter with careful hands. Miss Brooks, I believe this photograph belongs with someone who understands what quiet kindness looks like. The woman beside your mother was my late wife, Isabella. Long before Noah was born, she volunteered every Saturday at that community center because she believed every child deserved to feel important. She often spoke about another volunteer who never missed a weekend, even while raising a young daughter alone after losing her husband. I never knew her name until I saw your employment file at the school. Yesterday, I searched through Isabella's old photographs and found this one. I thought perhaps you should have it. I read the letter twice before lowering it onto my desk. For years, I had believed my mother, and I lived completely separate lives from people like Vincent Moretti. Yet long before either of us understood how our paths would cross, someone we both loved had already stood side by side, serving the same community. The realization left me quietly speechless. That afternoon, I drove to the small cemetery where my mother rested beneath a maple tree overlooking a peaceful hillside. I placed the photograph against the headstone and smiled through unexpectedly warm tears. You never told me, I whispered. The wind moved gently through the branches above me, carrying the faint scent of late summer grass. My mother had always believed that the smallest acts of kindness traveled farther than anyone could imagine. Standing there, I finally understood what she meant. The following evening, my phone rang just before sunset. Miss Brooks, Vincent said after I answered. I hope the photograph reached you. It did. I looked once more at the picture resting beside my living room window. Thank you. A quiet silence settled between us. Neither of us seemed eager to interrupt it. Finally, I asked, did Isabella know my mother well? Not for very long, he answered. But she often said your mother made every child feel seen. I smiled softly. That sounds exactly like her. Vincent's voice became quieter. Isabella believed education was the purest form of hope. She used to tell me that classrooms changed futures more often than boardrooms ever could. I leaned back in my chair, letting those words settle into my heart. She must have been an extraordinary woman. She was. Another thoughtful pause followed before Vincent added, I think she would have liked meeting you. I looked toward the fading sunlight spilling across the old photograph. Perhaps, I said gently. Our families met long before we realized it. We were simply too busy looking forward to notice what kindness had already connected behind us. On the other end of the line, Vincent did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet gratitude that no amount of influence could have purchased. Some connections, he said softly, take years before they reveal why they mattered all along. The first month of the new school year passed more quickly than I expected. Fresh notebooks slowly filled with handwritten notes. Classroom discussions became livelier each week, and the nervous energy that always arrived with September gradually settled into comfortable routines. Noah sat in the third row near the windows, exactly where he had chosen to sit on the first day. He no longer arrived believing he already knew every answer. Instead, he carried a notebook filled with questions. Sometimes he stayed after class asking about historical speeches or constitutional debates. Other afternoons, he helped younger students prepare for quizzes before starting his own homework. The change did not happen overnight. It happened one ordinary decision at a time. One Friday afternoon, the school hosted its annual Academic Achievement Assembly. Families, teachers, local business leaders, and members of the Board of Education gathered inside the auditorium decorated with blue and silver banners celebrating student excellence. Every seat was filled. The quiet buzz of conversations echoed beneath the high ceiling while students adjusted ties, straightened dresses, and nervously waited for their names to be called. I stood near the faculty section reviewing the program when Principal Harris approached with an expression I could not quite read. Emily, she said softly, there has been a small change. What kind of change? Mr. Vincent Moretti asked if he could say a few words after Noah receives his academic recognition. I looked up in surprise. He wants to speak publicly? She nodded. He insisted the school approve the speech beforehand. It is only 3 minutes long. I smiled. That sounds like him. The ceremony began with the school orchestra performing the national anthem. One by one, students crossed the stage to receive recognition for academic growth, community service, leadership, and perseverance. When Noah's name was announced for outstanding academic improvement, the applause felt warmer than louder. He accepted the certificate with quiet humility, shaking hands with the principal before turning toward the audience. I noticed something different immediately. He searched for me in the crowd before sitting down again. Not for approval, simply to share the moment. A few minutes later, Principal Harris stepped back to the microphone. Before we conclude today's ceremony, one parent has requested permission to address our students. Please welcome Mr. Vincent Moretti. A respectful silence settled across the auditorium as Vincent walked onto the stage. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, and the intricate tattoos rising from his neck disappeared beneath the crisp white collar of his shirt. His posture remained calm, his expression composed. He adjusted the microphone only slightly before looking across the audience filled with students, parents, and teachers. Good afternoon, he began. His voice carried naturally through the auditorium without effort. Most of you know me only as Noah's father. He paused briefly. Today I would like to speak as a parent who learned something important from a teacher. I felt every pair of eyes in the room slowly shift toward the faculty section. Vincent continued without hesitation. Last semester, my son failed an examination because he left part of it unfinished. Like many parents, I wanted answers. What I found instead was honesty. He held up a photocopy of one page from Noah's examination booklet. The teacher who graded this paper did not embarrass my son. She did not underestimate him. She simply believed he was capable of more than he had chosen to submit. The auditorium remained perfectly still. She could have changed a grade. She chose to shape a character instead. Vincent looked toward the students seated in the front rows. Success built on shortcuts disappears quickly. Success built on integrity stays with you long after school ends. Then he turned toward me. His voice softened, but every word remained perfectly clear. Miss Emily Brooks, thank you for reminding my son that effort matters more than entitlement. Thank you for reminding me that the greatest educators do not simply prepare children for examinations. They prepare them for life. For one long heartbeat, the entire auditorium remained silent. Then someone began applauding. Another parent joined. A teacher stood. Within seconds, every student, every parent, and every faculty member rose to their feet. The sound filled the auditorium until it echoed against every wall. I stood frozen among my colleagues, overwhelmed not because my name had been spoken, but because a father had chosen to celebrate honesty instead of influence. At that moment, I realized the lesson had reached far beyond one classroom. It had quietly become part of an entire community. 1 year later, I stood in the same classroom where a single unfinished examination had quietly changed more lives than I could have imagined. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows exactly as it had on the day I first opened Noah Moretti's exam booklet. The desks were different. The students were different. Even the bulletin boards displayed new projects and new dreams. Yet something about the room felt wonderfully familiar. It still believed that every young person who walked through its door deserved another chance to become a better version of themselves. Noah was now a senior. Every Wednesday afternoon, he volunteered in the tutoring center after school, helping freshmen who struggled with history and writing assignments. The students admired him not because his father was respected throughout the city, but because he never laughed when someone made a mistake. Whenever a student apologized for getting an answer wrong, Noah smiled and repeated the same sentence I had once said to him. Grades measure one day. Character is built afterward. Hearing those words in his voice always made me quietly smile. They no longer belonged to me. They belonged to the next generation. One crisp October afternoon, the tutoring center finished earlier than expected. Noah stayed behind collecting notebooks while I erased the whiteboard. Miss Brooks, he said, do you remember the essay I never finished? I laughed softly. I remember every student who ever surprised me. He nodded thoughtfully. I used to think failing that class was the worst thing that ever happened to me. He looked around the empty classroom before continuing. Now I think it was the first honest thing that ever happened to me. Before I could answer, another familiar knock echoed through the open doorway. Vincent stood there carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a small box from the neighborhood bakery that had become something of a tradition between us. His tailored charcoal coat rested comfortably over a white shirt, the intricate black tattoos climbing from his neck and extending across his hands before disappearing beneath neatly buttoned sleeves. Time had not softened his quiet confidence, but it had changed something much deeper. He smiled more easily now. Am I interrupting? He asked. Only a history lesson, I replied. Noah laughed. A good one. Vincent handed each of us a cup before looking toward his son. Your tutor is waiting downstairs. Noah nodded, gathered his backpack, and paused at the doorway. Thank you, he said. The words were simple, but they carried more meaning than either of us expected. After he disappeared into the hallway, silence settled comfortably inside the classroom. Vincent looked across the rows of empty desks. I used to believe influence was measured by how many people listened when I spoke, he said quietly. Now, I asked. Now I think influence is measured by what people choose to do after you leave the room. I smiled into the warmth of my coffee. That is a lesson history has been trying to teach for centuries. He laughed softly. I suppose I finally started paying attention. We stood beside the classroom windows watching students cross the courtyard beneath brilliant autumn trees. Some hurried toward sports practice. Others carried musical instruments or science projects. Each one believed the future belonged somewhere ahead of them. Do you know something strange? Vincent asked after a long pause. What? The entire city expected me to change 1 grade. He looked toward the hallway where Noah had disappeared. Nobody expected a teacher to change 2 lives instead. I did not know how to answer that. Some compliments are too honest to interrupt. The final school bell rang, echoing through the building before fading into quiet. Students laughed as they hurried toward waiting parents and yellow school buses. Another ordinary day had come to an end. As I locked my classroom door, I realized that the story had never really been about a failed examination. It had been about the courage to tell someone the truth when it would have been easier to look away. Years from now, my students would probably forget dates, vocabulary lists, and even some of the lessons I carefully prepared. But I hope they would remember one thing. Integrity is rarely loud. It does not arrive with applause or recognition. It begins with one honest choice made when no reward is guaranteed. And sometimes, the quietest decisions become the ones that echo the farthest.